I'm curious. I am curious. Curious.
By nature.
Welcome to Curious by Nature. I'm Jessica Johnson from Newswise. Exceptional athletic performance is optimized by mental toughness. Some people develop this naturally, but the good news is that it can also be taught. Whether it's a high-stakes athletic contest or an important boardroom presentation, our guest today knows the science behind staying cool under pressure. A former pro softball pitcher herself, she knows what it's like to get into the zone. Her insights could help anyone perform better in their careers and in life. Dr. Buning, thanks for joining us. Please introduce yourself and your work.
My name is Dr. Megan Buning, and I am a clinical associate professor at Florida State University, and I teach in the FSU Coach Interdisciplinary Center, which is an athletic coaching degree program. I also work as a certified mental performance consultant, or a CMPC, which is credentialed through the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. I'm curious about finding the most innovative ways to get people interested in learning about the mental game and how to apply it.
And can you tell me a little bit about your work?
So what I do full time is I serve as a professor mostly. I teach students that are graduate students that are wanting to get into some level of coaching. A lot of our students are in that kind of K-12, some into collegiate coaching, and then we do have some coaches that are at the professional level. And that's what I spend most of my time doing is creating courses and delivering content that is going to advance them as a coach in a way that's not only going to help them be a better coach, but also help the athletes that they serve. And then part-time, what I do with my CMPC work is I work with a variety of clients that mostly are athletes. I do have some coaches, and then I work with teams. And some of the work that I do there is training the mental game. So how do I teach athletes tools and techniques that will help them perform at their peak, which involves getting past mistakes, learning how to stay focused when they need it, how to refresh their brain, all the things. And some of that work actually crosses over into the corporate and first responder side as well.
You were a professional athlete, a softball pitcher. So I'd like to know a little bit about kind of your sports life and how did that mental performance look during your years as an athlete? And then kind of how did that influence you to become and to do what you're doing today?
I was a pitcher. I pitched at the University of South Carolina and went from there and played professionally with what was called the National Professional Fast Pitch League at the time, or the NPF. And then I also played some with the British national team. I am not British, but I was signed on as a guest pitcher to help them qualify for the '04 Olympics. So when I played, I always was told that I was mentally tough. And, when you're basically a kid, you don't know what that means. And I have to credit my mom for a lot of that because she was pretty challenging, I will say, in a good way. And a lot of what I learned how to be on the field came from either listening to her or trying not to hear her. And so what ended up happening is, in hindsight, I looked back and I realized that I was pretty tough. I was able to fight. I was able to compete. I was able to get in the zone, which some people know that term of just being in, it's really flow state, but people call it getting in the zone and not hearing what's going on, really just being locked into your performance. And I was naturally able to do that. Well, that's a skill. And at the time, I didn't know that. So I will say that after I got done playing professionally and took my first coaching position at Florida State, I started to realize that I was there was a little bit of a disconnect between me as a coach and the athletes I was coaching. And I didn't like that. I was having a hard time understanding why they couldn't do some of the things that I could do. And then how could I get them to understand some concepts, whether it was skill or mental? And that's where I started really thinking about I want to further my education. I want to be the best coach I can be.
What were some of those things that you had picked up, and how can you describe them, I guess, after maybe looking back on them to be able to describe them to someone else, and that it is something that maybe another athlete could learn to do?
So I'll start with the things that I was good at. One was this ability to compete. And I was a tough competitor, and I still to this day have to kind of settle down and not compete with everything. But that is a skill that you can teach somebody. It's a mentality. It's an offensive mindset versus being scared and timid. And I was very rarely ever scared or timid, but that is something that I see a lot with athletes and even coaches now. When we can train your brain to think in a different way and how you approach scenarios. The other thing I've already mentioned was the ability to get into the zone. That is also a skill. Some of that has to do with natural ability. Not everybody can get into a zone. Not everyone can get into a zone the same way. And that is something, again, that you can train and teach. I also was really good at this resilience piece. So even if I failed, I didn't like it, but I was able to pick myself back up and come harder at the next shot or pitch or whatever it was, next game. But there are some things that I realized looking back that I also was not very good at that I help athletes and coaches and teams with now, and that's emotion regulation. And that is also a skill that you can teach. So for me, where I failed is I was this big competitor and I would let my emotions sometimes get the best of me. And I'll give you an example. This is when it really hit home for me that this was something that I was not good at, but it was a skill that I could learn and something that I could help others moving forward. If I got hurt, let's say a ball was hit back to me and it would hit my shin. That hurts really bad because you're close to the batter at that point. Sometimes when I played, I would just lash out. If the athletic trainer came up and wanted to help me or a teammate came up, I would get really angry and tell them to go away. And that's inappropriate. That is not productive in any sense. So what I realized in reflection was that was me not being able to regulate my emotions in that moment. And so the way that I taught myself after I learned that that is a skill and what goes into that was that I personally, if I got hurt, I just needed a moment. I needed to be able to pause, walk away, get myself together, and then I could engage with the people that were trying to help me. And so after I learned my process, I was able to say, give me a second, remove myself from that situation, and then I would re-engage when I was able to get myself together so that I could have a more productive response.
It's very interesting because, while we're watching athletic events, we often can see players have this emotional breakdown in a way or react emotionally in a negative way. And is this something that affects their sports performance negatively, and why?
So that's a really great observation and question. And the answer to that is sometimes. It depends. Some athletes can play with anger. Some athletes can get a productive response from inside for them that is fueled by self-talk or actions and emotions that maybe you would think are inappropriate. So for example, I was one of those athletes. I was fueled by anger. If I was angry at the opponent or something else, I was able to channel that energy and that emotion into my performance, and that helped me play better. And if I was allowed to express my emotions as some of what you're seeing, I'm sure. Other athletes, yes, it could influence their performance. If they're allowing the opponent to, as we say, get in their head, or they're allowing a mistake to kind of keep replaying in their head and they're living in the past in that moment, then yes, it can affect their performance. So when we think about self-talk, when we think about expressing and feeling emotions and channeling that energy, every person, whether you're a performer or not, it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or if you're getting up to make a big presentation, every person has a unique set of emotions and self-talk that will fuel them the most effectively.
What does it mean to have the ability to compete?
So when I talk about having that mindset of competing, a lot of times people think that when you compete, you have to be competing against somebody else. Like when I go out there to pitch or to whatever it is that I'm doing, I'm going to go against Jessica and I want to show that I'm better than Jessica. And yes, that might be part of it. So we have this innate, when we're competing, some of this pull is I want to be better than whoever it is that I'm facing. But competing also can be a challenge mindset. So that offensive mindset that I mentioned, it might help if I describe what a defensive mindset is first. So if I'm in a defensive mindset when I am in a competing situation, what happens is I am allowing the opponent to dictate what I do. All right. So the easiest way to think about this might be basketball on defense. So the defense, a lot of times, just kind of the general look at it at the lower levels, when you play defense, you're kind of moving with the offensive player and you're trying to block them, not let them score. And so when I play with a defensive mindset, that's kind of what I'm doing is I am saying, all right, I'm just going to react to what my opponent's doing. And if they move up in the box, then I'm just going to keep moving the ball out off the plate as a pitcher. Now, if I am in a challenge mindset or in an offensive mindset, I am going directly to where I want to go. I am going to be the one calling the shots. I'm going to be the one dictating the moves. And I see that opponent, either the opponent as a challenge. All right, if you're going to move up in the box, then I'm going to go harder inside on this pitch. I'm not going to allow what you did to change my game plan until they give me a reason to. Okay. The other thing about offense and defense is when I'm in a defensive mindset and I'm kind of in that, it can cause hesitation.
How does someone get into the zone or flow state?
To get into what we in academia call flow state and what most people would refer to as the zone, let me first preface this again with not everybody will have the skills to be able to do this. So to build the skill set of being able to get in the zone, there are a few things that you really want to pay attention to. One, I need to be able to be mindful. I need to, and what I mean by that is present in the moment without judging the person, me, the other person, or the situation. That's all mindfulness is. So that means if I am thinking about past performances or that past pitch or whatever just happened, or if I'm too far in the future, maybe anticipating what could happen, guess where I can't be? I can't be right there in that moment. And so I start missing cues and things like that. And that's actually a skill that I spend a lot of time with clients working on. But to be able to get into the zone, I have to be able to stay present in that moment so that I can pick up on all the cues. I can experience the feelings coming in, all the things. The other thing is I need to be in a situation where my skill set can match the challenge I'm up against. So if I am in a situation where I don't yet have the knowledge, maybe it's the rules of the game or the performance or the actual skills to be able to do what I'm being asked to do, and it's just too far out of reach for me in that moment, I'm probably not going to be able to get into the zone because the challenge is too big for me in that moment. But if my skills match or exceed the challenge I'm up against, then that's going to lay a foundation for me able to get into the zone because I'm not going to have to be thinking about, well, I don't have those tools yet. See how that works?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is I need to be in a situation where I'm enjoying what I'm doing. If you don't like what you're doing, then good luck. At some level, you've got to be able to like what you're doing. Now, I say that, and then people are going to say, well, when I have to work or when I'm writing or something like that, sometimes I find myself immersed in the activity. So there are moments where like for me, I can get into the zone while I'm working. And if I'm honest, there's a little bit of work that I like. So there's something there that you like, and you have to be able to recognize this is part of building that skill, right? But recognize that sometimes when you're trying to get into that zone, it's a struggle. There's a phase right in front where we fight, and it's like, I don't want to do this. But if you push through and you get through that little itty bitty moment, then you'll start hitting that flow state. And I see that a lot with work, right? Oh, gosh, I don't want to work. I don't want to sit down and grade this paper or whatever. And if I just do it anyway, guess what? I start getting into that flow. I don't hear other things. For me, remember, it's different for everybody. I don't hear other things. I never heard the crowd. The only person that I could hear when I was in the zone was my coach. I could barely hear her. The other thing that can help people get into that zone is imagery. And so imagery is a skill within itself, and we use it in different capacities, but imagery is where you're using as many senses as possible and you're building a scenario in your head. So that means visualization is part of that. And that's the big common one we hear about. See yourself doing whatever it is, that performance, whatever it is that you want to do. And that's part of it. But it's also about bringing in what you hear. So the sounds of the crowd, a certain smell may trigger that zone, getting into that zone. The feelings that you want to have. I want to feel confident. And if I allow those things to come in, I'm more likely to get into that zone.
Are there any kind of small, fast exercises when you're in play that you can try to remember to help yourself get there? If you've already gotten there in the past, but you're not feeling it, you're not there, is there something that can kind of get you maybe on the right track to get there?
In my experience personally and working with clients, I think the biggest thing would be to work on your mindfulness, staying present in that moment and allowing yourself to get into the moment. And I say that because remember that struggle we talked about? Sometimes we're there in that performance, but we're allowing those thoughts about other things that are going on, whether it's a fan in the stands or thinking about what so-and-so is going to think about if I swing the ball or swing the bat this way. Allow yourself to get immersed in whatever the task in front of you is.
It's been mentioned that certified mental performance coaching can be life-altering. Can you share a story or a moment where you saw that kind of transformation with an athlete?
A few years ago, I had a private client that was just getting started in the Division I umpiring field. And he was trying to work his way up into what is the top tier. So the Southeastern Conference, the SEC. And he was very young. He was the youngest umpire and he'd had some experience, but the coordinators saw promise in him and his ability. So the first time I met him was at a training camp. And it was the first time, it was a fall training camp, so not a big deal, but for him, it was a tryout in front of the coordinator that could assign him to these big Division I games. Mm-hmm. And I remember meeting him. He was a softball umpire, and I met him underneath the stadium, and he was almost in this panic state. He was breathing really fast. They were about to hit the field, and I got in front of him. I was there to train. I was there to do this. I got in front of him and I said, he's okay. We've already talked about this, so I'm going to share his name. His name is Jacob. And I looked at Jacob and I said, look at my eyes. And I said, I want you to follow my breathing. And I walked him through a deep breathing exercise, which I use all of the time and train my clients. And I taught him a refocus routine just very quickly within a matter of 30 seconds. And I told him, I want you to use this when you go out there to call this fall game. And he did. And he came off the field and he said, that is one of the best plate games that I have called. It was like magic.
Yes, that's incredible. That's a great story. Would you mind sharing what that breath work or that breath exercise is?
Sure. So what I use as an anchor is the simple technique of diaphragmatic breathing. So we're going to engage the diaphragm under our lungs, and what that will do is a couple of things. One is it pushes up underneath the lungs so that they expand and can get more oxygen. So there's that. But big deal there is that diaphragm, when you engage it to breathe, it hits the vagus nerve that runs up your spine and into your calm down system in your brain. And so when we can hit that nerve, especially in moments before he gets into a panic attack, and helps him regulate his emotion and helps his brain realize, okay, we're fine. So the technique itself is just the simple diaphragmatic breathing. And then you can do variations of that. There's a lot of different techniques, like especially like fighter pilots and first responders, they'll use box breathing, which is a 4-second hold or inhale, a 4-second exhale, a 4-second hold, and you just kind of work around in a box, but it's engaging the diaphragm.
If an athlete or a team is losing or they've made a big mistake, how would you recommend that they bounce back mentally?
The old school mentality, including when I played and when I coached even, was we were taught to just kind of get over it or just pretend like it didn't happen. Well, thankfully, the power of research, what we know is that is not very, it's not very productive. It doesn't work very well. So what I would tell athletes that and teams that are trying to get over these bad games, these bad plays, is there's a process to work through. First, we want to experience that emotion. We need to be in that emotion. Now, sometimes if it's post game, we're in that emotion for a little bit longer. If we're in a game, we're in that emotion pretty quickly. Or we may even just be in it when we get on the sidelines or in a timeout, right? So it's not the length there of how we're in that emotion varies. But we want to experience that emotion. Then we want to acknowledge why. Why do we feel or think that way? And so what we're doing there is a couple of things. One, we're saying it's okay. It's okay. You can be mad. You can be frustrated. And think about why you're frustrated. Well, I'm frustrated because I know I could do better than that. Right? So we want to acknowledge that. But then after we experience and acknowledge, then that's when we are starting this process of moving forward. So we want to ask what adjustments we need to make. And that can be mental, physical, emotional, all or one. Once we identify what those adjustments are going to be, then we ask ourselves, is there anything we can go back and do about what happened? No, there isn't. So we want to toss it. And so you may hear the EAT IT acronym, which is the exact process that I just walked through. Experience the emotion, and then the A has 3 parts. Acknowledge why you feel or think that way. Ask what adjustments you need to make. And then T, toss it.
What are some of the common mistakes coaches or players make when they're under a lot of pressure?
Sometimes under pressure, what I see is athletes or coaches choke. So they lock up and they either physically, mentally, or both just cannot make a decision. And in that moment, it's almost a paralysis by analysis. So they're and that has to do with the flow of focus. I see choking. I see some slip into that defensive mindset where they become very reactive instead of seeing things as a challenge or an opportunity to go out there and do something different, show what they can do, anything like that. They slip into that defensive mindset. And then along with that, what happens a lot of times is they lose self-confidence, that self-doubt, imposter syndrome starts sneaking in, and it can become a cycle very quickly. So I think those are kind of the 2-ish biggest mistakes I see under pressure.
The French Open just finished, and for me, it seems like tennis is a great way to see really that mental performance because they're 2 individuals that they're just starkly there, and you're aware of kind of their performance, and you can see hints of their mental maybe situation. It seems like it can go so up and down and change many times within a match. Would you agree that there are some sports that you can see that mental performance much more starkly than others?
I think so, and I think you're right on. I mean, you have 2 individuals, those are the only 2 athletes of focus. The camera is always on them. I think that their responses, the expressions on their face, how they're swinging absolutely uh, can show the audience what is going on mentally with them more so than maybe you would see in a soccer match or even football or even softball. So those big team sports, when you think about where the camera is and where the focus is, there may be a couple of key players on those,
Just like the pitcher?
like the pitchers, yes, yeah, or the quarterback or the forward, something like that. But they're not as in the spotlight as when you have these individual sports that are competing, and that can not all athletes are going to be able to handle that, or they may not be ready for that. And that's a really great point because the spotlight is on them all of the time.
I assume that most athletes, they feel like that. They feel like everyone is looking at them, especially if they get the ball, that they're maybe even enlarging the importance of how people are maybe looking at them.
Absolutely. A lot of times, and that's actually something that I work with clients with that I see, especially lately, and with particularly with my younger clients, the preteens, they make the situation or the event bigger than what it is.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
that's a really great example. So they may think everybody's watching them when in reality, they're watching the pitcher or they're only seeing you when the ball comes to you or things like that. But yes, because you're out there, it's all eyes on them. But again, that's something that at a young age, especially if you have athletes that want to play in college and or professionally and keep going, you want to help them get used to playing and feeling like the attention is on them so that when college coaches come and sit in the stands, it's not a thing. We're going to assume that you're always being watched. Every time you step on a field, a court, whatever it is that you play on, in a pool, assume that somebody is watching you. And a lot of times they are.
What are 3 things an athlete can do to improve their mental state and therefore their sports performance?
My top 3 things that athletes can do to improve their mental state or their mental performance, I would say start easy. And the first thing, you've heard me say this already, is practice mindfulness. And that doesn't have to be for hours on end, but just working on whatever task you're doing, even if it's for 30 seconds, be present. And we want to be present, fully engaged with whatever it is that we're doing. And we want to let these other distracting thoughts that we're going to have come in, and then we're going to push them out.
I find it fascinating because it seems like that mental component is so important for so many athletes, and really there's not a lot of emphasis given to it. And I think for children and athletes that are, very young and aren't necessarily sure whether they're going to be more serious about sports, they don't have the ability or the support in that area at all.
I would agree to some extent. That's what our field is trying to do. So when you see the CMPCs, let me just explain to your audience a little bit. The Certified Mental Performance Consultant is the only nationally recognized credential for mental performance work. And again, what that says is those individuals that have the CMPC have specific training with sport populations, and they have supervised hours that they have been under somebody that has more experience working in that capacity. You do have your licensed clinical mental health counselors and psychologists and social workers. But if you think about mental health on a continuum, your clinical individuals that are licensed, they are skilled and trained to work with the clinical concerns. So these are going to be concerns like your depression, severe anxiety, things that are creeping into all other areas of your life. People with the CMPC only, so I'm not licensed, I just work in the performance space. So I'm not going to diagnose, I'm not going to treat some of those clinical issues or any of them really. I'm going to refer, but I can help people that want to improve their performance. And this stuff isn't really creeping into other areas of their life. And so I say that because that's why the CNPC was created. I can't remember how many years ago. It's not been terribly long. Maybe it's been less than 10 years, I think, because the field recognized that there are people with a skill set and with that education that can help individuals. Not everybody needs clinical mental health, right? So we are trying to get out there and to make everyone aware. The problem that the field has is that it's not a regulated field in the sense that anybody could say that they deliver mental skills training.
And how much of a difference do you think it can make in an athlete's life or someone who's becoming an athlete?
It can be a game changer, especially if you catch them young. The younger the athlete and you start building in little skills that are appropriate for that age, by the time they get to college. So I'll give you an example. I have a client, she's now 14. I've been working with her since she was 12. When that athlete, even when she just starts playing high school ball in the next year or two, she is going to be so far ahead of most of the athletes on her team and her opponents because she has intentionally been working on her mental game. And actually, let me bring the research in here. Here's what we know. I mean, this is documented in the literature, is if you take two athletes and they are pretty evenly matched physically, skill-wise, and even how they think strategically about the game, right? So they can pretty much do very similar stuff. This could be two athletes on the same team. The athlete that will outperform is the one that has the stronger mental skills and the stronger psychological game.
And that's exactly what I was hoping that you were going to reference, or something like that. So thank you I didn't know if there was anything or any kind of research about it, but yeah, that I can definitely imagine. And like you said, you somehow naturally found it when you were growing up.
Yes, I naturally kind of fell into, I have certain I didn't have all the mental skills, but I did just by my experiences and how I was coached. I had, and genetically, that's something else that we're finding out in the research, is that some of what we call, I put in air quotes here, mental toughness, because that can be very subjective, but we're finding that some of that may actually be genetic. And that's still, very new in the research, but whatever it is, I had some of that naturally. And that's also something that I hear a lot of, especially with the adults, clients that I work with. It's, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I had to figure that out. It's just one reason why I want to do this work, whether it's teaching coaches or working the mental game, is I want to help people get to some of those conclusions and not have to struggle and figure it out as much as I did. There's no reason that we need to do that anymore.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buning. It was such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.